culture throughout time and throughout history globally. You can see the kind of power mechanisms and power players, the brokers, at work. Um, and when I think when you think about the staying power of art, right? How important symbolism is and what art can possibly communicate. It's no shock at why elites want to control that aspect of society. So the way that art is typically funded in
What
this
is the full
country,
pressure?
right, is
That was
through patronage. And when you have elites who idolize Eurocentric ideals and aesthetics, right? You're going to get a certain kind of product, and you're going to get a certain kind of uh, or certain through line, I think, of cultural priority or prioritization. So everything is going to be juxtaposed to that. Everything's going to be compared to that. So in this sense, I want to say whiteness, right? In a U.S. context. Um, and my view as a producer of art, I've been a producer for over 20 years now, background in theater. And in that art form, it's all about whose story gets told and when and how and by whom and who profits off of those stories, right? And I know I have fellow theater artists in this cohort and fellow artists in this cohort, and I would love to hear their views in the chat and in the chats later about this kind of stuff. But if we're producers, and equity, right, or racial equity or equity writ large is a cultural um, ideal or idea, um, and producers are makers of culture. We have the power to produce equity, right? If we bake it in from the start, if that's the value, if money isn't the goal, and money is necessary, resource is necessary, and I do want to say that. I do want to center that, right? To make art is expensive, um, and you know, I think my practice has shifted over the past 10 years, specifically since I've moved into more consulting and more resource building with community and in community. So I got started with oral history work back in 2016, prior to the just prior to the Trump election. And we were producing in Brooklyn with the Brooklyn Community Pride Center a oral history project called the LGBTQ New Americans Project, which was documenting the lived experiences of queer LGBTQ plus asylees, refugees, and immigrants living in New York City. A majority of those folks were asylees. So they were escaping very violent, turbulent, what's the name, environments, hostile environments, countries with laws on the books that, you know, uh, it was state sanctioned violence against queer and especially trans individuals. And we did that for 4 years. That was funded by the city council. Um, Not well funded, but it was funded. And we were able to compensate folks. My primary viewpoint as the producer was we need to compensate folks first and foremost if they're willing to share their stories. Because in the act of sharing their story, they're also reliving those stories and they're embodying those stories. They carry those stories with them, they embody them. The emotional labor of that is extremely taxing. And so we were able to create a program where I call it kind of like holistic compensation, of where we're not just compensating folks for the hour-long interview, you know, um, we're covering transportation, we're creating a welcoming environment, we're providing stipends that are meant for use, beyond either transportation or food or things that folks, I've been in so many rooms and grant reviews and things where folks are like, oh, $100 will cut it. $100 is good enough. Like it's very arbitrary of what, folks, especially in power, positions of power and with resource, might think is justifiable. And, oh, this person will make do with $100, right? For an hour. So holistic compensation is something that I've carried through to this new project that I've been working on. So Chhaya, when you talk about underground culture, for the past 3 years, I've been leading the development of the Drag Arts Oral History Project, founded here in Philadelphia. Now, we did start this work prior to all of the current legislative attempts at restricting drag and gender expression, trans identity, and healthcare, and so on. So when we designed the project, I was really coming at it from a standpoint of, over the past 20 years, I've also, in my own coming out and in my own embracing of the community, and also like coming out and growing up juxtaposed to the rise of RuPaul's Drag Race and popular culture, and also just the proliferation of drag brunches. Go to any city, throw a dart on a map, you'll find a drag brunch most likely. Um, Movies like Tu Wong Fu and Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and things like that. The language of drag and the aesthetics of a kind of drag have entered the chat and have entered the conversation nationally. But just like most queer history in this country, including the AIDS crisis, including the Stonewall uprising, pre-Stonewall efforts at, an equality movement, there's no, I don't want to say there's no consistency, in the narratives or even in the attempts to preserve and document and go back. And, there is a national LGBTQ museum in the works that's launching in New York to try to be like the epicenter point or the center of the culture, I feel like, which is a great thing. But similarly, to like efforts with the Smithsonian systems and things like that, like the challenges that the American Museum of the Museum of the American Latino is currently going through in Congress. And, if you look into that, that's a very problematic and interesting case study. A lot of times scholarship and elitism is still relied upon to frame the narrative. And what we're doing is something different. We're putting the narrative agency in the hands of practitioners themselves and documentation power in the hands of drag artists themselves. So what we're looking at, we have 17 oral histories documented here in Philadelphia. We prioritized BIPOC, queer, trans voices first and foremost, because we know the art form owes a heavy debt to those folks. And historically, the movement owes a heavy debt to those folks who are on the front lines of the Stonewall movement and things like that. Ballroom culture, right? Where the vocabulary has been co-opted, for pop culture consumption. And that was developed underground by Black and Brown and Latinx folks as well. In the indigenous community, Two-Spirit folks, and the idea that gender is beyond a binary, this is all really new language and really new ideas. So, when we look at cultures globally and in the US throughout its history, it's not as black and white as the Trump administration and its allies want to make it sound. So that being said, I'll share the link in the chat. You can learn more about the project, watch the trailer. We're going to start rolling out our archive in the next month or so. It's free to the public for use. And I don't know, working with that community has taught me a lot, that it's not a resourced community. So whatever you see on Drag Race, $30,000 couture gowns and people taking out loans, that's a calculated risk and a calculated investment. your local drag artists and your local queer artists who are working in bars and clubs and doing drag story times in libraries and things like that, they're not getting paid. Hands down, not getting paid what they should be. So I invite folks to become part of the conversation, to learn more, support queer work, support queer artists, support artists in general. So Steph, I want to turn it over to you and hear how your work intersects. And I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to be with y'all.
I've been reading the comments in the chat, and it's really interesting that the theme to me feels like it's community and relationships. And in my work, and actually, I saw Ian's question about what happens, like what is this post, there are lots of questions here now. What is the what does post-capitalism look like? Does capitalism has to be destroyed before something else takes its place? Is there incremental transition? And I feel like I don't have an answer for that, except that I feel like education, and Ian's an educator as well. I feel like that's a really good place to start. And I work in out of school time. And I think, Chhaya, you really set us up for this nicely when you talked about building community, because that's really the foundation of all of this. And I think about my work, and over my career, I've been an outdoor educator, and my whole goal has been get people outside who don't have access to the outdoors, who might not have the skill or the confidence or the resources. Duluth, Minnesota is a hockey town. You can spend a lot of money on hockey gear, or you could look out your window and never go outside. You don't have the resources, the support, you don't have the mentorship, you don't have that opportunity. And from there, thinking about what does it take to get people to feel comfortable in the outdoors, and also thinking about what does this look like on a national level. So I've been really fortunate in my work to work nationally on system change, so equitable quality improvement systems for out of school time. And so what does that mean? It means that no matter where you are, no matter what kind of programming you go to, if you are a young person or a parent, you have a choice of programs where your child is going to be treated as a whole human, like you're going to meet those human needs. And I think a lot of the conversation is about human needs as well, and how do we meet those, or how do we just deny that exists, and we just kind of we don't care about people as humans, especially kids. And so think about a 6-year-old going to an after school program where they're trying to babysit or crowd control, and that's it. Doesn't have to be that way, right? There's so many great opportunities to have these really amazing experiences. And also to think about what experience does that child bring into that space? What happened at home? What's their history? What's their background? What was their teacher like to them today? What's going on? And just a simple starting with building that relationship and that community. Like, hey, how's it going? I really like your shoes. Like you're noticing them. Like there's research that shows we just ignore kids. Like they show up and we just ignore them and just kind of keep them from hurting each other, right? Just babysitting, straight up babysitting. It just kind of makes me feel, it just breaks my heart. So I took a lot of little notes here as people were talking, because I think the if education is a key to changing the economy, maybe incrementally by giving people power, because I've thought about this too. When I work in places like Oklahoma or Texas or Florida or Arkansas, where you cannot say social emotional learning, you cannot acknowledge that there's actual real difference between people. And I do it anyway. My mom used to say, please don't get arrested. I'm like, I'm not going to get arrested for talking about social emotional learning in Oklahoma. But you can't use federal funds to talk about human needs and human skills. And I couldn't figure out for a long time, why would anyone be against this? Why is this a problem? Why can't you talk about feelings and emotions and thinking about how we connect with others? It's because when you feel like you have power, then you have power and you take that power back. You stand in that power and you decide you're not going to stand for the status quo. I think that's why education gets squished down. So right now, my big project is with the American Camp Association. If you think about the American Camp Association, camps have a history of cultural appropriation and white supremacy. A lot of camps don't know that, or they're learning that now, or they're trying to change that. And camp also has a history of character education. Character education is historically based on hierarchies, right? Whites are better than people of color. Men are better than women. And what do we do about this? Like, how do we change the system so that when you are in a camp, an after-school program, a school, you have an experience that isn't based on all of these hierarchies, all of these systems of oppression. And that's part of my job, which I think is really interesting, is to help people understand what are real universal human needs and how do you then build relationships without feeling like, oh, this person is different than me. I don't know that I can do that. Of course you can. Of course you can build relationships with lots of different people doing lots of different things. And then when you learn about what their needs are, I'm always amazed with after school folks and camp folks. They're like, oh, I didn't realize that behavior was this need that wasn't being met, right? Behavior is the language of needs. And we often try to say, oh, this behavior's bad, kick him out. Like, we don't want him in here. We don't want that. Instead of building a relationship and caring about people and figuring out how do we create spaces where people feel safe and supported and they can do great things, not because we create that for them and not squash it. So, um, yeah, so invigorating, ignoring babysitting and supervising youth to like self-actualization, like really giving young people a chance to thrive. And I just have to say one thing about what Heather McGee said in the little segment. So the Federal Reserve in Minneapolis does conferences, workshops, all these things. If you talk to a Federal Reserve banker in Minnesota, they know the value and return of early childhood education. The University of Minnesota has done studies about the value. I think it's $12 for every dollar invested in after school, high quality after school programming. And of course, who gets high quality after school programming? It's not kids of color oftentimes. So that's also part of my job, is to make sure that wherever you are, your after school programming is high quality. And so it's fascinating to me that if we know the economic case, that's not even enough, right? It's so ingrained and embedded that there's so much racism that we can't even decide money's not even enough for this. So that it's a lot to think about. So I'm happy that I get to do the work, and I'm really excited that people like seem to want to do it. Like, that's the thing that makes me feel excited, is that there's a huge appetite for this. And I'm hoping that we can see some real system change, and I'm glad to be part of that.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and I think someone said it earlier. Part of this conversation we're having, some people refer to it as a relational economy, right? So moving away from capitalism and more on relationships and thinking about the people that we're hoping to engage with and hoping to provide access and resources. And opportunity shouldn't be a privilege, right? Opportunity should be available to everyone. So I really appreciate all the things that you all are doing. And as we wrap up, and this is for the audience too, so feel free to drop it in the chat. Um, I want you all to share what's one tool or resource you'll recommend to someone who's ready to challenge the dominant economic narrative in their own community. So, what's one gem that you want to leave our audience with today?
Um, I I was as you all were talking, I was thinking about my mom's story where she's like, and the gem here is coming, is she left her country a long time ago, and was forced to get married at 17, all that stuff. Then she went back and she was like, I don't understand. She went to her village and she's like, why do folks just sell their pot of kanji in the morning and by like noon they don't make more to sell, right? And she was, and I asked, I said, Ma, when you were back then, isn't that what you did? And so, like, it's already like what I'm realizing and what's revealing to me in this process of bringing together Southeast Asian organizers across the country is that we actually have those thinking and practice already that we just don't remember. And I had to remind her, and I was like, she's like, but it made, and it made her very happy. And the lady was like, yeah, I'm done at 11. I'm just selling that pot and that's it. We're good. We got enough money for shoes, school, you know? And so there's this way of thinking, this shift of consciousness that we all have. And maybe for my people is the returning and and maybe the passing, and also the remembering, right? Like, we actually know how to keep each other safe. We are our community's refuge. We
Mhm.
have we know how to everybody sell chicken, but you could go buy any chicken. It's not competition, and I'm done and I'm happy by the end of the day. So I think would love to see an economy that keeps people happy and joyful, and be able to do things with each other, to like build with each other, to have to get a massages. So I don't want his money. I just want the massages, right? So I think about that story very much, because um maybe the young folks got to remind the old folks.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot.
And I would like to, just as folks are dropping their comments into the chat, I would like to open up the floor to anyone from the audience who has a question, or also if anyone would like to. I saw that there was a lot of reactions to Ian's question earlier about, so like what, could precipitate. So could capitalism, does it need to just abruptly end, or is it a gradual shift, or are there elements that need to be replaced? Um, any of our panelists, Wilfredo, Steph, Chhaya, or also anyone from the audience who we can elevate and uplift your thoughts, perhaps even spotlight them and welcome them onto the pod.
Really quickly, artists artists I've worked with are inherently anti-capitalist. It feels like, and I share the same viewpoint, but I'm also working within a realistic framework. And I'm trying to help folks move the needle where they are, when they are. And so, I would often advise individual artists, especially who don't have the security of a 501c3 around them, or an institution around them, or any kind of legal entity that they can use to navigate the systems that exist, is that um, uh, capitalism is we're not undoing capitalism today as a system, but there are ways that you can operate in this system and navigate this system with value, with integrity, and with ethics. And so it doesn't mean that I don't hold other views, but I think it goes back to that point about education writ large, is that how many of us in this cohort, are still intimidated by writing grants or talking to funders and things like that, those power dynamics that are real and exist, but we never got training on that. We never learned how to do that work, right? And so I think I hold that a lot, and I try to center that with the artists, especially drag artists that I'm working with, who don't operate in the nonprofit system in general, right? They're on the margins of a marginalized community, at the mercy of nightlife culture, which is even more predatory and problematic. So education, I think.
And I just want to just piggyback on that, Wilfredo, because I think about American Camp Association has a 6-year grant from the Lilly Endowment to do character education and to do equitable character education. And when I've been doing some research to just learn more about it and kind of think about, what's my role in this as a facilitator of training for them, when we stopped focusing on character education, we moved to test scores, and we moved away from how to think about justice and care and connection and relationships, and how to really treat each other well. By the 90s, what we get is people saying, instead of, oh, I want to live a life that has good impact on others, right? Like, I want to care about other people and I want to do things that are good for the world. The majority of students that they interviewed said, I want to make money. And so if our goal is to make money instead of making the world a better place, then it's time to think about, how do we start by focusing on what makes the world a better place? And that's how we care about justice and we care about each other in relationships and we care about our communities. And that, to me, could be character education along with many other things. But wouldn't it be great if people went back to saying, I want to make the world a better place. I want to make my community a better place. I want to be a better person. And that seems like a really worthy goal.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
it's
No, Castel, please.
I was gonna say, I can only imagine, right? What would that be like if we actually provided education and we shifted to focus on people and not on money, and how much that would just shift our world is mind-boggling.
And so just to the folks who have joined our podcast, Wilfredo, Steph, Chhaya, if you could, please drop in the chat if you feel comfortable doing so, any additional information, resources, tags, links, websites where folks can follow more about your work and your individual and collective journeys. And I believe it's time for us to conclude this segment and welcome up our next guest.
It's really good to just hear about people that are really looking at the macro level of the boots on the ground of the communities that can really use that shift in power, and how do we just focus on them, right? And not think about all the other things. So it's super exciting to hear about a few of the stories. I'm sure there's many out there and I'm enjoying reading about them in the chat. So as people keep sharing your stories, your experience, your thoughts, that's how we can really help build this inclusive economy, is by building upon each other. So yeah, we're ready to move to our next group. We still have more to come, so I hope you all still have room in your brain to consume more exciting stories about some change that's happening, particularly as we think about the economy. So we're going to welcome now Denise and Treasure to the podcast. How are y'all doing today?
Great now that I'm with y'all. I haven't seen y'all in a bit.
Yeah, it feels like a new year or something, right?
Right? Happy New Year.
Thank you so much for including us today.
Yeah, no, we're excited. We're excited to hear
Very.
from you. We've already kind of gotten our preview of how, people are running our media and our news and our outlets. So we're excited to give you the spotlight and to hear about some of the things that you're doing in the economy. So, Denise, I know you work in health philanthropy, right?
I do.
Okay, so how do you reconcile the responsibility of directing resources while also being mindful of where those resources come from?
You know, Castel, that's something I think about almost every single day, and I appreciate that question. I actually have a quote, which you can't see here, but a quote near my desk that says, "Philanthropy is commendable, but it must not cause the philanthropist to overlook the circumstance of economic injustice, which makes philanthropy necessary." And to me, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s words acknowledge a central contradiction. You know, philanthropy is a creature of our market system's unequal benefits, and yet charged with addressing its prejudice and exploitation. So as most of us, I think listeners here on the call probably know, in its purest form, philanthropy means love for humanity. In Greek, philos means love, right? So that's exactly what we're talking about here. And modern philanthropy dates back to about the 1870s, when Andrew Carnegie proposed a radical idea at the time that the wealthy should give away some of their gains to aid the masses. And I think today, most of us understand that many philanthropic efforts are good, but the supply of charitable giving can't possibly keep up with the demand for it. And in my perspective, philanthropy isn't like a single thing. I think philanthropy is on a continuum that spans from charity to justice on the other end of that continuum. So your question about how do I reconcile where some of these abundant resources come from? For me, the common question that I ask myself is, if not me, then who? Another white man from the East Coast from an affluent background? Now, I don't mean to offend any of today's listeners with that comment by any means, but I think it's imperative to have people working in the philanthropic sector who have a strong moral compass and relevant lived experience. That's where I'm coming from. And regardless if the resources come from a hospital, a private philanthropist, or a large corporation, I think we need people who understand community-led change, social justice, cultural dynamics, and racial equity. People who understand impact and how to navigate and create longstanding systemic change that's going to be sustainable over time. We need innovators, entrepreneurs and disruptors. I consider myself a quiet disruptor. And if we have time later, I'd like to share 2 examples of how I'm working through philanthropy to ensure that community voice is always included in our decision making. And one of those examples that I might share is about local philanthropy, and the other is national philanthropy. Thanks again for that question.
Yeah, it's really interesting the way that you put that, because when we think about resources, it's some people say, well, I don't want to take money from this organization or that organization, but we want the money, we want the resources. So thinking about just how we get resources to the people that need them, where those resources come from, how they're allocated, all of that is an important part of our conversation. But Treasure, you're in housing and housing access, and we can all agree, I'm sure, that housing is a human right. But sometimes it doesn't feel that way, particularly for those who are housing insecure. So talk to us, what's going on with housing in the economy?
Ooh, everything, especially now with our new administration, I think things are a little bit more unstable than they already were. I'm based in Los Angeles, but I work on housing solutions for the nation and globe. I'm trying to figure out ways to improve affordable housing development for all economies, whether they're ours, which is supposed to be the greatest, but we all disagree. And then, ones that have a lot less resources. Um, I'm focused right now in Watts, California, which has the largest disbursement, or I should say, concentration of public housing units this side of the Mississippi. So that's quite a bit in a little like 1.5 mile radius. Majority of it is public housing. And so those were Army barracks years ago. They were probably not worthy of having the Army there as far as safety was concerned and like viable, livable conditions, but definitely not worthy of it now, 80 years later, right? And so the fact that our people are still living in these places, and these are predominantly Black neighborhoods in the 80s, and since the 80s have become 75% Latino, 25% Black, as immigration has kind of caused people to move around. So these are still people who don't have a good step on the ladder, I should say, when it comes to the economy, right? And so why or how could they change their circumstances if they don't even have citizenship, if there's so many barriers just to getting a job, right? Just to getting food, just to getting even WIC. I know someone was talking about the welfare queens. It's typically not these people. These are the ones who are like, don't even know that it's accessible to them, one, or are very, very proud and stubborn, don't want to do that because they know what the stereotype is for them and how they'll be treated. Or 3 are just very scared of what that means, having their name in a system that's already judging them, right? So, if as a Black woman in Los Angeles, I'll say this, if I have Section 8 or I'm on an affordable housing list and I have that unit and I want to get married, I'm gonna think twice about that, because now I know that my man is either gonna be on somebody's watch list, because that's typically how they've taken a lot of our men to jail and criminalized them. That was connected to the first commercial that you had, right? Or if you're an immigrant still waiting for your citizenship papers, trying to do this the right way, but maybe you have a cousin or a grandparent who did what they needed to do to get to safety and are here, you don't want your name on the lit list because you don't want ICE coming and knocking on your door tomorrow night, right? So really choosing between whether I live today with my stomach in pain, or do I, fight to see another by signing up for these resources. So my work, I think to the point that Denise said, is really just trying to be that voice that's experienced some of this firsthand, and can acknowledge that some of these things I haven't, but I've seen and my heart aches, and putting the right people in place and power to make decisions, and not having it be a white man or a white woman who has the savior complex there. And again,
Yeah.
no offense if you're not that white woman or man, but yeah, typically.
And thank you all raising some really good points. And our last group of guests, they really share the focus of how they are doing work to empower people to kind of take ownership of the change that can happen in our economy. And some of the things that you are talking about now is about those current folks who are in those positions and how the influence that they have over the different systems. And so my question for both of you is, how do we hold those decision makers accountable for creating just systems that actually work for the people that they should be working for?
You want to go first, Denise, or you want me?
Go for it, Treasure.
Okay, I haven't thought about this answer. That's a great question, Castel. I love coming on your show. So for me, I would say I work for the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles. Prior to that, I worked for the County of LA. And prior to that, I worked for a large mega church with about 3,000 to 4,000 members. And so holding people accountable in these different circumstances or economies actually of their own was unique. With the county, it was very political, but a little bit further from DC because we were getting our money via the state. So we didn't have to really deal with the lobbyists directly one-on-one. However, policy did influence everything we had to do. If there was, the president or the governor decided to do something, it was immediately handed down to us. One example I can think of was with the Community Development Block Grant. And just how people can utilize that money. I was implementing that grant as an analyst right when the pandemic started. And so uses for that grant had to change very quickly before even legislation could change, right? We just had to kind of emergency approve some things to make sure that people were able to get access. So sometimes with CDBG dollars, people have to show their ID or be able to prove where they live in order to benefit from the services that are provided, but that was not allowable. However, as the reporting analyst who knew an audit would come, I had to be the mean person on everybody's behind, making sure that they were still gathering as much evidence as possible or staying in contact with those who were in need, just to ensure that they were not audited or accused of fraud later on. And a lot of fraud happened, as we all know, right? Quickly, just to the city right now, one of the things I'm doing is building green space in Watts and just making sure that there are parks because green economy is really important too. Black and brown and indigenous folks, indigenous folks had their land taken, right? So that's a whole nother conversation. And then are kind of banned from utilizing it in the ways that are important to their culture. They don't get to practice on it at the times that they would normally have practiced on it if they were not interrupted from using that space, so on and so forth. But then Black and brown folks are pushed into these little small bubbles with the red lines and not able to use anything. So trying to bring that back. And yes, recently I was able to work with the local tribe, the Kiss Nation of the Gabrielino tribe, to get them to come and speak to the entire city development team as we are doing redevelopment in Watts and in San Pedro and just some local areas in LA that is on their historic land, and just making sure that they get paid for it. I think going back to what Wilfredo was mentioning, holistic compensation is really important. So I didn't want to just cut them a check, although I know they needed that check and that's something people normally don't do. The law required that we reach out to them, that we get their approval. And that could have been easy to do without really taking into account their perspective. But I wanted to make sure that they were heard and that they got the time to present the things that matter to them without being interrupted or shut down. And so I've been working with them to have like 3 meetings with our executive team as well as our development team to do that. So just giving space for voice, power back, money, and a little iteration that I've used. I'm a coin this term, but right now I do embracing, empowering, and emboldening communities. And I think the 3 E's that help me get there are education, equity, and economy. Those are the ways that you can do those other 3. So yeah, with that, I'll give it back to Denise.
Thank you, Treasure. I've really enjoyed learning from you and alongside you throughout our journey and preparing for today's session, but also just since we first met several months ago. Castel's question, I think philanthropy should have mutual accountability and shared power between other funders and nonprofits. I really love this question, Castel, because it's a question I often ask my internal colleagues who also work in philanthropy. It's not often a popular question when I ask it, but people know it's coming and I'm going to be the one to ask it. I think it's important for every foundation, whether they're a private foundation, a family foundation, a community foundation, that we look at our own reflection in the mirror every once in a while and we take stock and figure out, like, how are we doing? Where are the gaps? How can we improve? Are we being responsive to community, or are we using a top-down approach? I think we should hold ourselves to even higher standards. I've only worked at private foundations so far, and we are stewards of private resources that don't belong to us. We report to ourselves and to the IRS, so we're audited every year. But in philanthropy, we have much less red tape than other places like the federal government, our education systems, nonprofits. Oftentimes in philanthropy, we have the resources, the means, and even the community partnerships necessary to dismantle our own policies and practices that aren't effective. And having the luxury to be able to create and dream up systems that benefit everybody, not just the elite. And so I think in philanthropy, the work that we do should be about forming meaningful partnerships, ensuring that those closest to the problems have a leadership role in creating and implementing, relevant and timely solutions, and making sure that communities are in the driver's seat, not foundations. Like, yes, we can provide resources, we can provide support, we can champion the work, but we shouldn't be the folks deciding like what to do and how to do it. It really needs to come from the communities that are facing these challenges. So I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but I guess the main point I want to make there is I believe philanthropy should have mutual accountability and shared power.
Yeah, I really like that mutual accountability part. We always in civics and governments class talk about checks and balances, but what does that actually really mean of having that accountability in our systems, particularly in our economy, to make sure that the people that the economy is supposed to serve is actually getting the benefits that they need? Yeah, I like that a lot. So we really appreciate all the work that both of you are doing, Denise and Treasure. Both of those things are important, both housing and philanthropy. It's critical if we want to get to this inclusive, human-centered, relational economy. Those things will be critical. So you all are doing some phenomenal work, and thanks for sharing some of those stories with us today.
Of course. Thanks for having us.
Thanks again for having us.
Yeah, thank you both. Are there any questions in our audience for either of our panelists? Oh, for Denise or for Treasure in her absence.
I'm here still.
Oh,
She disappeared.
in the meantime, I want to just uplift some reoccurring themes and sentiments that have been shared, especially that what Wilfredo had mentioned earlier about holistic compensation that had come back up in the chat again, and then also decolonizing wealth.
Uh-oh. I'm by myself.
Hi, Treasure.
I was just going to add to one of the points that Denise kind of brought back to me when she was speaking last. The mutual accountability is really important. And it kind of ties into Ian's question about whether or not, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Is it like this dream that we want? Can they be separated? Does it need to be separated in order for it to happen? I chose to work in the government 10 years ago because I really wanted to infiltrate the system from within. While I knew there were people who were striving and pushing for abolition of these same systems. And I was totally behind that too. That just wasn't my work, my calling. I knew that I could do good work from within while the system was being torn down, because I did not want us to have to wait 50 years, 3 generations to kind of see that, or take the chance that what is happening might happen, in the sense that someone would take their reins back and kind of bring us backwards. So while I'm in the systems, you know, you guys are getting to hear my inner thoughts. Everybody doesn't know what my play is until it's made. And I take pride in being the little sneaky link that can bring somebody in and give them that power. I'm okay with that. But I won't get to the top places letting everybody know that that's how I move. And I encourage people to, if they need to, you know, don't lie, but you know, be strategic in how you utilize the power that you have and how you make it grow, because there are people doing the work to really cut the system down, which we need. We need that push, but we do need people who are in the system who have access to the resources right away, who can help somebody today if they needed that too.
Thank you, Treasure. That actually reminds me of a passage in the Motorcycle Diaries, which was an autobiography of Ernesto Che Guevara. Hope I pronounced his name correctly. Where he had referenced at the end of his biography about the need to at times be a dissembler of doctrine, and to dissemble, which this is actually an SAT word at some point in the very way past, you know, means to almost deliberately mask or make ambiguous your whatever it is that you're looking to conceal. And in this case, it's doctrine. So your true beliefs, at times, the power structure here in America, if they know that there are those of us who are working within the system to change the balance of power, and to right the ship, you know, that could put you in a very compromising uh, uh, situation. And we have approximately 10 more minutes in the segment. I want to just uplift a comment that Nawahine had made. She is requesting to hear some of the successes that you all have had working with traditional philanthropic donors and government to shift understanding with mutual accountability.
I am happy to respond to that question. I think it's another great question. So again, I've worked mainly in private foundations, which means our money came from a private source, such as a merger with a hospital, or in our case, Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance company merged with a for-profit company back in 2001. So they had to leave something behind in the state of New Mexico. So they left behind what's equivalent to a $5 million endowment that is now like 35 million. So that's where we got our money from. And so in 2021, I inherited an organization that only had one previous executive director of 15 years. And during the foundation's 20 plus years of existence, that foundation had never taken time to reflect, pause, or update its policies, processes, or procedures. We had a board of trustees, and also a community advisory committee. Both of those groups have representation from all over the state of New Mexico. For those listeners on the call today that aren't familiar with New Mexico is vastly rural. It is the 5th largest state in terms of landmass. We have the highest percentage of Latino and Hispanic Americans and the 2nd highest percentage of Native Americans, behind Alaska. And so this health foundation, the grant making was stale. The foundation was still using a charity model and a top-down approach. I'm a researcher and evaluator by training, and I knew that I needed to use data and factual information to help evolve this health foundation. So in order to basically flip everything on its head and start over, which is basically what we did, I needed to build a strong case for why we needed to better incorporate community and voice into everything that we were doing, not just our grant-making practices. And so one of the first things I did as executive director was I commissioned what I called a landscape review, which assessed the foundation's grant making over a 10-year period. So we had an external consultant who interviewed current and former grantees all over the state. We had her interview applicants that had applied for grants but weren't selected. And then we also had her interview peer foundations to see what they were doing. And she also reviewed grant data from our grant management system. So after she conducted this landscape review, and after I shared those findings with my internal board and community advisory committee, I also wrote a letter to the field, and I shared the findings publicly, all of the findings. We were transparent. I outlined 4 things that the foundation was already working on in response to the community's input and what we learned, and I thanked them for their time and their wonderful feedback. In my first year as executive director, we revamped our grant application and review processes. We include paid community reviewers for the first time. I restructured our board and our community advisory committee. I reduced our staffing structure and increased our grant budget. So when I started, the foundation's administrative budget was higher than the grant budget. So in a financially poor state like New Mexico, our communities really need all the capital they can get. And so following trust-based philanthropy principles and what I consider common sense practices, we omitted things like unnecessary mid-grant reports and other administrative burden for our grantees. We removed site visits from the grant decision process. We received immediate feedback from grantees and applicants and prospective applicants that we were on the right track. In my second year at that same foundation, I was able to secure a large donor gift from Mackenzie Scott, and we developed a maternal health initiative using that money and some other funding that I had secured. And so all while this was happening, a global pandemic was also happening in the background. And so we were able to just kind of quickly assess where we were as an organization. The board and the community advisory committee, though it had its challenges, they accepted that I was a new executive director and I had worked in national philanthropy. The previous executive director had only lived in New Mexico. And so they really had kind of no choice but to trust some of my decisions, like to do this landscape analysis and to listen to community across the state. And also to, while this was all happening, we were launching a COVID recovery effort that focused on an equitable rollout of the vaccine for COVID. And so there was a lot of things happening all at once, but we were able to work with other local funders, national funders, indigenous communities, and hardest to reach communities like our immigrant communities here in New Mexico to really incorporate their feedback as best as we could and to update our policies and practices. So all of that was far from perfect, but I'm happy to say that I did step down from that role in early 2024, and all of the practices and updates that we made are still in place today, and the foundation continues to sort of grow its own trust-based philanthropic principles over time. So I hope that's helpful in understanding a little bit about how I used data, factual information, and community engagement to help us update our practices.
Yes,
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
I was just going to piggyback really quickly. Action research has been a really great tool for me and my team at Housing Authority of the City of LA. Just in that we are beginning to get a lot of new grants, pilot grants from various agencies like U.S. Forestry, who would never pay any money to go towards housing, right? Same thing with Caltrans, which is our Department of Transportation. They're paying for one of my parks. So even NIH has finally decided to put money behind the fact that public health is impacted by housing and neighborhoods, right? And so science is kind of shifting, I'd say, over the last 10 years, and the government is really slow in following science sometimes. So finally, we're beginning to get grants that are asking us to create our own research methods and share with them how we plan to utilize the funds that they give us. And so action research has been the tool that we've chosen to use a lot, community-based in particular. And that has required some of the things that Denise mentioned, but gaining the trust of the community, finding out who already has that trust, connecting with them, and not in a way that uses them, not in a way that like takes away their trust with the community because now they're tied to you, but just really feeling free and creating a space that allows them to give you honest answers in the moment. And so we have like a displacement avoidance working group so that when we decided to redevelop the housing units at Jordan Downs and Nickerson Gardens, that did not require people to move to another city or state for 5 years while these apartments were built, but allowed us to buy land that was right next door because that was one of their fears, being put away from their community and not knowing anybody 2-3 years from now. And so those are the sort of things that were informed, cost money to do, but gained the trust for years more, right? So now I'm not Hackla, I'm Treasure, the lady who helps make sure that their needs are met. I'm no longer a government employee that's seen like, oh, we don't want her around here because she's going to snitch on us. But no, we do need her around here because she's going to tell those people what we need and figure it out for us. And so I think those are the kinds of ways that the trust-based philanthropy, as well as just community-based action, participatory research is really helpful.
Yeah, I think those are two really good examples of how how we can move from a transactional economy to a more relational economy that really thinks about the people, and really inclusive of all perspectives and all experiences. So really appreciate you sharing that. So we're coming kind of to the end of our time. Again, speaking of work and self-imposing sabbaticals and all of that good stuff. But keep the conversation going in the chat. We're not going to wrap up immediately, but we will come back right after our last commercial break of the day. Thank you, Treasurer and Denise.
Thank you both.
For me, it means that there's acknowledging that there's enough resource and that we live in abundance. And that it means moving from a place of abundance and mutuality and sharing and not competition. And I commit to advocating for that stance, especially with funders and supporters of my work in the nonprofit sector, and to support the whole cost of the work, the actual cost of the labor we all do each day.
Living in a shared economy emphasizes interconnectedness and the importance of collective well-being over individual accumulation. For me, it highlights the value of cooperation, research sharing, and mutual support within my community. It recognizes that my prosperity is tied to the prosperity of others and that we thrive when we contribute to systems that are equitable and inclusive. This perspective shapes my choices, from how I consume goods and services to how I build relationships and support my local community. One concrete action I am committed to advance a more human economy is how I spend my money. I actively seek out small businesses or minority business owners to spend my money with instead of shopping with large corporations. I try to do that so that I am supporting those in my local community, ensuring that the money stays in my community and does not go to those who already have large corporations and large businesses. That way, I'm very intentional about how I contribute to creating an economy that centers the human dignity over profit.
For me, the answer comes from Robin Wall Kimmerer's really beautiful new book, The Serviceberry: Abundance and Reciprocity in the Natural World. So I have a quote. In a traditional Anishinaabe economy, the land is the source of all goods and services, which are distributed in a kind of gift exchange. One life is given in support of another. The focus is on supporting the good of the people, not only an individual. Receiving a gift from the land is coupled to attached responsibilities of sharing, respect, reciprocity, and gratitude, of which you will be reminded. And for me, another quote from the book is exactly what I am working on and is so important to me to do. All that we need to live flows through the land. It is not an empty metaphor that we call her Mother Earth. Food in our mouths is the thread that connects us in a relationship simultaneously spiritual and physical, as our bodies get fed and our spirits nourished by a sense of belonging, which is the most vital of foods. And my commitment is to keep nurturing a sense of belonging. And I just love the idea of that being the most vital of foods for our souls.
A generative economy means that surviving is no longer a requirement or a lifestyle for Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks. We would get to thrive in a way that matches our ancestors' efforts and actually rest. I commit to providing mentorship and access to marginalized communities, then empowering them with decision-making power to embolden their community themselves sustainably.
For me, a generative economy, it makes me think about how much of this have been embedded so that I've been able to survive and raise my 3 kids in New York City as a refugee. And so for me, it really means that we build intergenerational power and passing of different knowledges through sharing resources and housing, et cetera. And for me, I am committed to creating safe space, connected spaces, and dignified spaces and homes and community for each and every one of us?
I believe in a shared economy where every person has a fair opportunity to achieve financial freedom and independence, whatever that means to them. Every hardworking person should have access to safe and reliable transportation, safe housing, and high-quality education and access to healthcare. So what that means is me and my neighbors and your kids and your grandkids shouldn't have to work 3 to 4 jobs just to survive. I am committed to creating career pathways and leadership opportunities for diverse and underrepresented people to work in the philanthropic sector. Most people in philanthropy don't look like me. Less than 2% of all philanthropic executives are Hispanic, and 0.5% of that 2% are Hispanic women. It's time to change the face of philanthropy to better reflect the communities we aim to serve and include people that have lived experience.
For me, creating a shared economy means that my daughter and all of her friends from her generation are going to grow up knowing without 20 plus years of counseling that they are well beyond what they can produce. I'm committed to living in a relationship with time that takes away pressure and takes away scarcity and begins to create presence and connectivity and abundance. And I'm also committed in 2025 to having a heart-to-heart conversation with my family about how we can begin to really create mutual and reciprocity economies within how we structure our household economics, and think about how we take care of the older generation and how we start to build more and more relationships of mutual service.
The shared economy is more than just an economic system. To me, it's a way in which we can rethink how we live, work, and connect with each other. It's about creating value, but not just through ownership. In fact, beyond ownership or possession, it's about creating value through facilitating access. Living in a shared economy is about creating a future where resources are shared more efficiently, communities are empowered, and opportunities are abundant for everyone. And I do not mean to escalate this so quickly, but I feel like I must do it. It has to be said. In order to advance a more humanistic economy, we need to bring about the downfall of this prevailing, preeminent capitalist culture, this capitalist society. And I'm committed to doing that through the advancement of equitable governance structures that ensure that those who will be impacted or affected by the outcome of decisions are front and center during the decision-making processes.
So I know we've covered a lot in a short amount of time, but I don't know about you all. I have received so many nuggets of wisdom from the stories that were shared, from the work that's being done. It's really inspiring to think about the possibilities of an economy that's different from the current one that we're in, that's more human-centered, that's more relational, that's driven by the concerns and the needs of the people. So I want to thank all of you for joining us, all of our panelists. Special shout out to DJ Elijah for being there with me throughout the whole entire thing. It's one of my favorite episodes of the podcast was having you all here today.
Same.
All right, so as we're closing it out, we're officially wrapping our podcast, but now we want to hear from you in the audience. So in our last commercial, you heard from us on our thoughts on what the economy means for us, a shared economy means for us, and what's one concrete action or thing that we're committed to do to advancing a more human economy. So now we want you to share. I'm going to drop those 2 questions in the chat. I'm going to unspotlight us so that we can all be in community together. And we want to hear your thoughts. So what do you think? What is a shared economy mean to you? And what's one action that you can do to contribute to that shared economy? Don't be shy. We know there's a lot of action in the chat. You have some brilliant ideas out there.
Then, it doesn't have to also be in the chat. You guys feel free to just jump in.
Oh, we got one. Christian, what are you thinking?
First and foremost, want to say Happy New Year and also excellent job today. It was phenomenal presentation from various points and whatnot. I love the concept around racial capitalism. That's something that I'm studying on right now. So for me, for me and myself and my family to live in a shared economy, I think it's about like thinking about the future, right? And thinking about it looks in future tense as well. We learn from our past, we're in the present, and figuring out how do we create that pipeline. For me, working with youth and young adults from 16 to 24 and being a college educator, I'm always thinking about how do we impact their lives, especially around economy, like the economy and how to be economically sound. One action item that I'm doing right now is we're creating a fellowship program. It's a Black financial, it's a Black money engagement. It's like BME. It's in the cohort that we're doing specifically for youth that are experiencing housing insecurity. And it's a 4-week program. You learn about how to invest, how to the history of the economy, and then also how to become financially sound. So creating these small cohorts out here in SoCal. So when you're talking about an action item, that's one thing that myself and my team is doing, and I'm really, really excited about it because, it's great for us to go to church and learn stuff, but how do I, and even at 38, 39, I'm not my credit ain't the best, but, how do I get myself to become economically sound, to be able to invest, to get home ownership, X, Y, and Z, money makes the world go around, and that's just what it is, and there are winners and there are losers, and hopefully over these next few years and generations, we change that dynamic. And so thank y'all for your presentation.
Thank you, Christian, for that response. And I would say it's unfortunate that money makes the world go round at this present time. And as you had said, hopefully that dynamic can be shifted because there's so much inequality that the world just doesn't often turn in the direction of those who need it most. That's too often.
Well, I just want to say excellent, excellent, excellent presentation. I have a stage for all of you actors. You guys knocked it out the park. I was just so enamored with the creativity that you put into this your presentation. There were so many things that stood out. I loved. You can't serve the people without loving the people. I think that was in the chat. Angela, thank you so much for that. And oftentimes, you know, as an employer, I've really tried to hire people because the work that we do, like we really have to make sure that we hire the right people. You can't serve the community unless you really love the community that we're serving, right? And that's easier said than done. One of the books that I'm continuous that I'm reading again is Good to Great by Jim Collins, and he talks about building the right team. And I can't tell you how many times, I mean, we've had tremendous turnover because we've hired people who were opportunists and really didn't have a love for the people. So thank you so much for that. The other thing that came up for me was being a conscious consumer. And Treasure, I think you mentioned this. And I too, I remember just during the holidays, I was buying a TV and 50-inch TV, and I saw it at Costco. This woman came up to me and she said, you can get it at Walmart for, $40 less. But I knew that Walmart made a significant investment in the Trump administration. So I paid that $40 at Costco. So again, being conscious consumers, um, even when it's we have to pay a little bit more. I'm committed to that. I just want to thank you guys so much for this presentation. It hit on so many points for me. And I love that we get to thrive in a way that matches our ancestors' efforts. Not just exist, but to thrive. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed this today. Time well spent.
Thank you for that, Teresa. Would anyone else like to share? share their comments or their concepts of the shared economy and one action that you are committed to advancing the humanistic economy. Also, I mean, if anyone else would like to just touch on any other point that was elevated during any of our segments or the commercials, please also feel free to speak on whatever you feel most compelled to do. Conscious consumerism, right?
There's one thing I'd like to share if we have a chance, if we have time.
Please, Denise. Yeah.
So something that I didn't share earlier, but I think it's important. So I think many of us on this call might also be, first generation college students. Most of us probably come from some sort of diverse background or places that maybe weren't well resourced when we were younger. And so for many years, I struggled, working in philanthropy because I felt like I didn't fit in. I kind of had that imposter syndrome. I went from working in education to working at the largest national foundation in our country, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And I was like one of 3 people that were from west of the Mississippi to work in that gigantic organization of like 350 people. And so the point I want to share is I know we're all on our journey. I'm still learning how to do this, but we each have a voice and we each have some sort of power wherever we sit within an organization or an institution, whatever type of work we're doing. And so that's how I continue to do this work is I figured out like, what is my place? What is my voice? What is my power? What systems can I disrupt? What can't I touch right now? And how am I going to do that? And I mentioned earlier that I consider myself to be a silent disruptor or like a quiet disruptor. I'm not going to be the loudest person in the room. I'm not going to like show up with, fire sticks and try to burn stuff down. Instead, I'm going to like sort of do my work behind the scenes. I'm going to gather information from other people. I'm going to summarize it in a very tangible type of way, and I'm going to share that information with my colleagues in a way that's digestible and provide one or 2 digestible recommendations that we can kind of do incrementally. And so I just wanted to remind people, like we all have, no matter what our title is, what our credentials are, we all have some sort of skill set or capacity to bring about change. It might be incremental change, or some of us might be able to just rip it down and build it up. I don't have that type of skill set myself, but I just wanted to remind folks because again, I struggled with that. I still struggle with that sometimes, like who am I to make these recommendations? But I now advise, 3 national foundations and I figure, well, they must have selected me for a reason. Like they called me, I didn't call them. So I better use this opportunity to really speak on behalf of communities that are never invited to these conversations. So thanks for listening.
And Christian, I do see, but I'm going to jump on really quickly because Denise, your comment reminds me of another question I didn't get to ask one of the panels was what's something, one thing that I'm going to paste it because I can't. Oh, one bold idea for seeing change, because I agree with you that we all can contribute to that change, even if we have just the ideas of putting the ideas out there, of sharing those ideas with others. Because even if you may not have that capacity, you may share that idea with someone else who does. So just offering that too, to think about bold ideas that we believe can actually change our economy and shift our economy. And I just challenge you to share that with someone else and pass it along to someone else. So Christian.
Great comment. My question is to you all, but also on top of those ideas, we should be getting paid for those ideas. But in relations to what's going to be happening after January, in a couple of weeks, right, with Trump, what is what with the new presidential and the new incoming administration? I guess my question to you all is what folks voted that this man is going to help and bless the economy. And that was in some world of theirs is that Trump is going to be the savior for the economy. This is why we're getting him in there. La da da da. How do we go into our communities and help folks to understand that I'm not going to say that's not the case. How do we provide truth to that, and then also provide healing in that as well? And I don't know if you guys already went over there, maybe I missed it, but I just wanted to ask you all, like, how do we do that as, community organizers or educators or activists or whatnot, or that's for anybody really?
I'll just jump on that really quickly. Because of what's going on right now, like a mile from me with the fires,
Right.
I can just point to Trump doesn't have that kind of power. I know he has the sense of grandeur, but these insurance companies stopped giving us fire insurance policies about 5 years ago. So everybody whose house is burning down, they have no home. They have no piggy bank to go to. So, and these people voted for him. Like my city had his signs. So this is not, it's going to be a shocker, but I give real life examples. And again, I was telling my pod earlier today that I think my city was one of the people who always thought the wildfires were the rich people who live by the beach and they shouldn't be building on the hill anyway, right? But now that it's us, it feels a little different. And I think we're going to have a lot of examples like that in the next month. I'm not happy that the fires are happening, but I am happy they're happening if they were going to happen right now, because that's a question that's going to be on his ass, excuse my language,
That's
the
real.
day he. And so I think that's the accountability we were talking about, right? Ask him on his first day, what you gonna do about this insurance? What are you gonna do about this economy right now? I want to see what his answer is to that. And so that's what I would encourage people who are asking or still supporting him and expecting him to help. Here's an opportunity. Let's see if he does it.
And Derek, we definitely see your hand up. And so we're gonna pivot to you in just a second, and thank you, Treasure, for that. Anyone else would like to respond to Christian's question?
And Chris, I'll just say quickly, I think the challenge with the people that are feeling that Trump will be the best option for our economy is because they're thinking of it in terms of a capitalistic economy and not the shared and human relational economy that we all know is what we really need. I think those that voted for him are thinking about it in a way that they're not truly understanding what they're asking for. They're not truly understanding that, yes, they may be voting for a capitalistic economy, and that capitalistic economy doesn't even include them, right? So I think that's the disconnect from the economy that we're currently residing in compared to the economy that we're talking about that we need to shift to and adjust and pivot to.
And and I don't even know that necessarily folks, and this is my personal perspective here, that like folks, voted for Trump as an endorsement of Trump so much as it was just an unendorsement of the current state of affairs in the world, the current economy, people, gas prices rising. Well, actually, gas prices have been falling, but that's neither here nor there. Just like housing, especially food, just basic essentials, and then also just the misinformation. During our first commercial segment, actually it was our second commercial segment, we had heard from some of the three top CEOs in the country, in the world, and there was that joke that was actually very much truth to it, is that people still think that that the folks who are running MSNBC and the folks who are running Fox, which are two seemingly diametrically opposed companies ideologically, perhaps, same country club, same school, same this, same that. And so at the very top level, so like the race is used, I think, the black and white and the color issue is used to really control the narratives down here to keep us fighting amongst ourselves. However, from my experience, those at the top, it's a war of ideas. It's about money, purely capital. Trump doesn't. He's very transactional in nature. He's going to tell you what he wants you to hear. He's a great salesman. He wrote The Art of the Deal. And I'm not enamored with Trump. I'm just giving you, why I believe that he's been successful in captivating the minds of at least half the country. And it's for those same qualities right there. Derek, let's hear from you, man.
So I was kind of struck by Audrey's comment in the video about having conversations with her family, because education happens, everywhere, right? It's through our conversations. I have a really specific positionality. I teach senior English, and when we move into this quarter, we've been talking about you and you in the world, and this quarter is about going out into the world. And I was also thinking about Treasure's comment about being strategic, right? Because I even put a comment in the chat earlier that I've had parents say, I don't want my student to learn empathy, because that takes away their ability to wield power abusively. But what we'll eventually get into as they start to take these personality tests and find out what their passion is, what they want their purpose to be, and then we talk about work and why we work. They'll start to see and bring up the conversation, or I'll nudge it, that capitalism is what they're going after, but it's also what annoys them about everything that they do. And start that conversation and let them drive that. That's my action, I guess I would say, is I'm already planning on taking this third quarter with my seniors to at least have them. We might watch They Live, the John Carpenter film, where you put the glasses on, you can see through everything. But allowing them just the opportunity, a glimpse at questioning capitalism and what we do and what their value is. Because when you talk about economics class in high school, it's not economics, it's just capitalism. That's all they know. So it's just an interesting place where I am starting the second semester and plotting my breadcrumbs that I'm leaving.
Thank you for that. And I'm not sure if anyone from the team wants to respond to that. I know that also Nawahine had dropped a prompt in the chat as well, but anyone from the team want to address what Derek had spoken about?
Can I just real quick reaffirm? I mean, it might just be because Derek gave a shout out to one of the questions that that I asked, or that was in the film, but I just can't even imagine the kind of constant pressure that you must feel as a senior literature and English teacher to really begin to use culture to prompt those students to ask bigger questions. Oh my gosh, talk about a pivotal time in a young person's life and the crucial role that you play. And also just want to lift you up for the work that you do, Derek, and for that modeling that you just provided us, because I think part of the challenge when we talk about what's one concrete step we can each take, it is to be able to use culture as a way of teaching, to use what we know that is a hollow promise of this capitalistic economy, to use it as a way of prompting what else could be done and really inspiring people to take their initiative with that. So thank you for motivating us in that way.
Agreed.
I just also wanted to point to the chat. I know you guys all don't work in real estate development, but it's a model that can be applied. And I think Doreen was asking a question about how to work with people who don't have the money to still get some of these things pushed forward. I worked on a report with ULI, Urban Land Institute, on the 10 principles for building racial equity in the real estate development space. But making the business case is one of the most important ones, because right now, getting this relational model of economy costs money, and profit is really all that's driving, the capitalism and those in the decision-making seats. So if you look at that report and kind of go over to that section, I think it's number 4, it gives you some really great tools to kind of implement what both Denise and I were talking about, how we have moved it at the macro scale. With these large dollars and with large decision makers. So I think those are some tips that might be helpful.
Thank you, Treasure. Just on that note, I've seen and I think Martin Luther King, there's a great reference, Martin Luther King Jr. has spoken about he said once that he felt as though he integrated his people into a burning house. And what he meant by that or rather that he was integrating his people into a burning house. And what he meant by that is that he understood that for all of the social rights that we were, I'm saying we as a, those who were and are in the struggle have been advocating for, there's still elements of the system, those who are the arbiters, those who are controlling the narrative, who are controlling the resources, the economy, the institutions. Like there's just certain principles and elements within the deeply ingrained within the ethos, the culture of these institutions that are just reproducing those, with the same mindset, and it's just self-perpetuating the cycles of inequities. And he realized that we were not going to. I believe that this is personally why he was assassinated. Actually, the night before he was assassinated in Memphis, he spoke to a group of unionized disposal sanitation workers, and he was talking about how we need to pool our resources together and to take our money out of these banks that are not hiring us, and out of these banks that are not giving us capital, access to credit. We need to find some, he referenced like Black-owned insurance companies and things of that nature. And so he began to shift from this purely a social, moral fight to one that was more economic in nature, and one that was more policy oriented in nature. And at his demise, at his untimely demise, his so-called approval ratings were historically low for him. But that's because the media, they've been demonizing him for years, though, as he began to pivot his approach towards the economy and towards the policies that have been, circumscribing many of us into this position of dependency. And I don't even know if that was on point. I hope it was, Treasure. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the city of Trenton and also the city of Newark have been instituting. They had programs where people could buy city-owned property for $1, so long as they had an intention to live in them. But those programs can be, it's a homeownership kind of homesteading initiative, but those programs can so easily be commandeered and exploited by outside institutional investors still. And so representation by the people for certain in government, so that we have the ability to discern, so we need more people like you, Treasure, who are working from within the system, who can say, this doesn't look right, this does not feel right, to be able to call out those bad actors, people who are just looking to take advantage of the systems at play to perpetuate their own wealth.
No, that makes perfect sense, and it aligns directly with the work I'm doing. So I appreciate that.
I know that Nauhine had asked about community land trust, and I know we have just 4 more minutes or so maybe we want to actually just have the CoHLI folks and the NCHE give a proper closeout. But anyone like quickly want to address? Okay, just sharing that as a bold idea. I'm thinking about it. Is anyone working or familiar with community land trust if they'd like to be able to address that?
I can. We could talk about it.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I meant like no, he like we could talk offline.
I got
Yeah,
you. My bad.
definitely. Yeah, I was just throwing that out there, but just appreciate this incredible conversation.
Mhm.
And Treasure, I'll definitely reach out.
Mhm.
Mahalo. Thank
Hostess with the mostest want to close us out?
Wait, before you do, I just want to throw out here in front of everybody. I think this should be a regular podcast. I know Dr. Gail is not on here, but we need to go ahead and push and see if she could watch this episode. We did this for free, but I think we could do some really good work if we had just a little bit of support. And I think we could target our cohorts, both the past and the present, to be guests. We don't have to look for those big names. I think this is something that's sustainable for a good time. So I'm down to be a producer, whatever you need. Okay, go ahead, Castel.
No, I was going to hand it over to the true hostess of all hostess. Monica.
Thank you, Castel. You all, first of all, let's give everybody on these two teams lots of love. That was really inspiring and incredible. Thank you all so much and so creative. I'm with you all. I'm waiting on Dr. Gale to check it out because I know it's got life beyond this moment. So thank you all again. And I'm going to invite Armand to give us our final announcements. For those friends of ours that are on the West Coast, we will have you in our prayers and our thoughts, and we'll continue to lift you up. And we look forward to seeing you all next month. And Armand, if you'll close us out. And thank you all again. This was really amazing.
Yeah, such a great job. And thank you, Monica. You beat me to the punch. I was going to send some prayers out to those people on the West Coast. So we're looking out for you all. As always, please look out for the coffee chats and the happy hours. This recording should be posted on Mighty Networks by the close of business tomorrow. And always check Mighty Networks for different resources and to stay connected with everyone. And on that note, actually one more thing. If anybody's in Chicago, around the 21st National Day of Racial Healing, please stop by Little Black Pearl. We are having a concert. So if you guys know anybody in Chicago, please reach out to me. And before we go, Christian had an announcement for you all.
Sweet. Greetings. I would like to tag team with what Brother Morris was talking about. 21st is the National Day of Racial Healing. I know I put it in our group chat. So Cohort 3 is pulling together an online event. I want to say shout out to those that have tag team and reached out. It's going to be an online thing around racial healing. If you are interested, let me know. Inbox me. We have a group me. If you're not in that, let us know as well. If anyone has the group me link, please post it in there. But on the 21st, it's going to be on Zoom. It was about 4 years ago when I joined this movement with Dr. Hunter and Dr. Gale around racial healing on a national level with Congresswoman Barbara Lee. And over the last 4 years, racial healing has taken place. But now that we have Trump in here, it's a whole nother conversation, right? And so we're going to talk about what we're doing as a cohort, where there are opportunities to grow and also to really show love on a whole nother level. So this is Cohort 3, taking advantage of that day, and we're going to rock and roll. Thank you.
Thank you all, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you, everybody. Stay safe, treasure. Peace, love.
Thanks, y'all. Bye.